All right, let's continue on with poetry. We are reaching the very end of our explanation of how we would read poetry. Today we're going to talk about grammar. So grammar is that thing that might haunt your nightmares when it comes to English. But when it comes to poetry, it's even stranger and harder to understand. So let's do what we can to get our minds around this part. So sometimes grammar may be used in poetry to interrupt the flow of a reader. Poets will often use things like commas, periods, semicolons, uh, brackets, any number of other poetic or any other grammatical punctuation to really break up the flow of reading. So normally, if you get very comfortable with reading poetry, you know how to stop instinctively with the flow of the piece that you're reading. But sometimes, if for inexperienced readers, poets might jam things in just to be very clear that you need to pause here. And sometimes they have poetry with grammar and punctuation that doesn't seem to mean anything at all. Sometimes you have things like capitalizations and places where that you might otherwise expect there to be a period or a comma that is just completely done away with. Emily Dickinson is very famous for this, not only in her poetry but in her general writings. And this also includes not just punctuation, but also syntax. So if you remember that poem that we just went over, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth, the syntax on that sometimes flipped around. Now, often a lot of beginning poets will do this in order to force a rhyme into place, one of those forced rhymes. But sometimes it can be done very deliberately, like again with that poem that we just talked about, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, where the syntax flips between modern syntax and Elizabethan syntax in order to get the feeling that he was going for in the writing. There's a couple terms that we need to know. One of these is caesura, which is to pause in the middle of the line. Again, this is something that we do all the time when we're reading, but sometimes it's indicated very clearly with punctuation marks. Another term we need to know is enjambment. Enjambment, when a line carries over to the next without interruption. So often when you hit the end of a line, it's generally an indication that you're going to pause there in order to either continue your rhythm or just to take a break before you continue with the poetry. But sometimes you get a line where you flow right over the top into the next one without breaking at all. So that's what that is called, as an enjambment. There's also an end stop, which is to stop at the end of a line to allow a beat for the next line, which affects pacing. So that's that one that we talked about up top there, is when you have something and you need to hold on. Sometimes these can be indicated by the end of a stanza, but when it happens within a stanza, that would be referred to as an end stop, where you need to hold on and really let the next thing carry a punch. And then finally, there are line breaks. So this is a separation between two sections of poetry, which indicate a particularly long pause or a switch in sections. So as I said, when you see that in between different stanzas, that's what it's referred to as a line break. And usually what that means is that pause for a second before we move on. In a song, this is where you stop singing and allow the music to flow through before you continue. So those are the basics of grammar. And obviously, it's going to be very complicated because in a system where the rules are different from person to person, it can be really challenging to read. So we're going to take a look at one of those poems that is particularly challenging because it's really thrown the entire system of grammar out the window. And it was done deliberately, kind of in the same way that Picasso was a master painter before he went back and really challenged the concept of painting. This poem that we're going to look at by E. Cummings really challenges the understanding of what grammar is supposed to mean in reading. So let's take a look at I Carry Your Heart With Me, I Carry It In by E. Cummings. And you can tell just by the title that he's really mixing up our traditional understanding of grammar. What do parentheses mean? What do brackets mean? When are you supposed to capitalize words? And this was done very deliberately. In fact, it's interesting because as we can see from the name here, everything is capitalized, but E. Cummings deliberately did not capitalize his name. so that it really challenged that even his name was him throwing something in the face of the English language and saying, I'll do whatever I want. Don't tell me when to capitalize or not to capitalize. I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear. And whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling. I fear no fate, for you are my fate, my sweet. I want no world, for beautiful you are my world, my true. And it's you are whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing is you. Here is the deepest secret nobody knows. Here is the root of the root, and the bud of the bud, and the sky of the sky of a tree called life, which grows higher than a soul can hope or a mind can hide. And this is the wonder that's keeping the stars apart. I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart. So that is the poem there. And as you can see, it's some really fairly advanced poetry because it doesn't stop when the punctuation indicates that it stops, or even when you might otherwise think that it stops. So this is one that you really, in order to read it honestly, you have to say the words as they come to you, which kind of jumps back around to poems having a form and a structure to just being something that comes from inside and expresses an emotion in the purest way. So poetry is never easy, but it's often interesting.